At a high-end restaurant, Isabella Reyes is no longer the timid girl who cleaned his floors. She is radiant, poised, and utterly indifferent to his presence. But what sends shockwaves through his very core? 3 children, sitting beside her, and looking exactly like him. Ethan's world tilts. Years have passed and he had no idea, no clue that he had fathered triplets. No warning that the woman he once cast aside had been raising his children without him. Ethan's fury ignites. But he isn't just fighting for answers now. He's fighting for something he never knew he lost. Love, family, and a second chance he may never deserve. Before we dive into this incredible story of heartbreak, redemption, and a love stronger than time, let me know, where are you watching from today? The rain pounded against the windows of Ethan Sinclair's penthouse. He sat at his desk, sleeves rolled up, staring at the contract in front of him. The ink had long since dried on the papers he'd signed. Another multi-million-dollar deal sealed. Another step toward growing his empire. But it didn't feel like a victory. Not anymore. There had been a time when Ethan believed in love, when he had planned for a future filled with warmth and laughter. A time when he had given someone his heart, only to watch them shatter it for a price. She had been his first love, the one person he had thought he could trust. But when given the choice between love and money, she had taken the money. She had smiled while doing it. That was the moment Ethan Sinclair had changed. Since then, he had vowed never to let himself be vulnerable again. He had replaced love with power, replaced passion with transactions. He built his empire, conquered industries, and made sure he was always the one in control. And it worked, at least that's what he told himself. But some nights like this, when the world slowed down and the silence pressed in on him, he felt it, the emptiness. It was late, past midnight, but he was still in his office, nursing a glass of whiskey, as he stared blankly at the flickering lights. The drink wasn't strong enough to silence that noise in his head. His phone buzzed on the desk, a message from one of his business partners, something about a contract needing urgent approval. He didn't bother responding. His jaw clenched as the old bitterness resurfaced. Love, a lie, a weakness. People used it as currency, a bargaining chip, and he had no interest in playing that game again. He had learned his lesson. Footsteps echoed from the hallway outside, light, hesitant, a presence he recognized. Isabella Reyes. She had worked for him for nearly a year. Quiet, diligent, invisible when necessary. She had this softness about her, something warm, something real, a quality Ethan never allowed himself to acknowledge. He had noticed her, of course, the way her eyes sparkled when she laughed, the way she bit her lip when she was nervous. But noticing and caring were 2 different things, and he didn't care. The door cracked open slightly. "Mr. Sinclair?" Isabella's voice was gentle, careful. Ethan didn't turn. "You should be asleep." "I was finishing up in the kitchen," she said. "But I heard—" She hesitated, glancing at the whiskey glass in his hand. "I just wanted to check if you needed anything before I left for the night." Ethan exhaled slowly. Something about her presence, her kindness maybe, rubbed against the rough edges of his loneliness. For once, he didn't want to be alone. "Sit," he said, nodding toward the chair across from him. She hesitated but obeyed, folding her hands on her lap as she sat down. The silence stretched between them, thick and unspoken. "You don't have to do this, you know," he said eventually, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Do what?" "Pretend to care." Isabella frowned slightly. "I do care." A cynical chuckle escaped him. "Why?" She blinked, taken aback. "Because you're human," he scoffed. "Barely." She tilted her head, studying him. "You work all the time. You never take a break. And tonight, you look like someone who's been carrying the weight of the world." Ethan let out a short, humorless laugh. "You've been watching me?" Her cheeks colored slightly, but she didn't back down. "I noticed things." A beat of silence. Something shifted in the air between them. Maybe it was the fact that she saw him. Not Ethan Sinclair, the ruthless billionaire, but Ethan, the man who once believed in love and lost. He reached for the bottle and poured another drink. Then, after a pause, he pushed the glass toward her. "Drink?" She hesitated before taking it, her fingers brushing his. A small, fleeting touch. "I don't usually drink," she admitted. "Then why are you drinking now?" She looked at him, searching for the right words. "Because tonight, I feel like breaking the rules." A smirk tugged at his lips. "Dangerous." "Maybe." The air between them tightened, charged with something unspoken. She should have left. He should have let her. But neither of them moved. Instead, he reached for her. A test, maybe. A moment of weakness. And she let him. The first kiss was slow, hesitant. A mistake waiting to happen. But mistakes had never felt this intoxicating. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. Yet, as the night stretched on, as their breaths mingled in the darkness, something fragile, something dangerous wove between them. By morning, Ethan was back to being Ethan Sinclair, emotionless, detached. He left the bed without a second glance, got dressed in silence. The warmth of her body still lingered on his skin, but he ignored it. Isabella stirred as he reached for his watch. Sleepy, soft, beautiful. "Ethan," she whispered. His body tensed. He hadn't realized she would say his name like that, with such tenderness. She reached for him just slightly, her fingers grazing his wrist. "Last night, it was nothing," he said before she could finish. The words were a knife. Her hand recoiled as if burned. Ethan straightened his tie, his voice cold, detached. "It was just one night, Isabella. Let's not make it more than it was." Something in her eyes flickered. Hurt, maybe. But she covered it quickly, nodding. "Of course, Mr. Sinclair." He hated the way she said his name just then. Formal, distant, but that was for the best. She got up, pulling the sheets around her like armor, shielding herself from him. "I should go." "Good idea," he muttered, turning away. He didn't watch as she dressed, didn't look at her again as she quietly slipped out of the room. And when the door clicked shut behind her, Ethan told himself he had done the right thing. It was better this way. He was Ethan Sinclair. He didn't need love. And Isabella Reyes? She was just a fleeting moment, a distraction, nothing more. The world didn't stop when Isabella Reyes found out she was pregnant. The sky didn't darken, the earth didn't shake. There was no dramatic thunderstorm outside, no cinematic moment of realization. It was just her, sitting in a tiny bathroom of a rundown apartment, staring at the 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test. Her hands trembled. Her breath came in short, uneven gasps. Pregnant. She clutched the test tighter, as if gripping it hard enough would change the reality staring back at her. Her mind raced. Ethan. Would he care? Would he even believe her? No. The answer hit her before she could even let herself hope. She remembered his cold, detached voice that morning, after they had spent the night together. It was nothing. She had felt foolish then. But now she felt something far worse. Alone. But she wasn't the kind of woman who sat around crying. So she squared her shoulders, wiped the stray tear threatening to fall, and stood. She would handle this. She would do it alone. But first, she had to try. A week later, she stood outside Sinclair Enterprises, her fingers curling into fists as she stared up at the massive glass building. It was intimidating, cold, just like the man inside it. Her heart pounded, but she took a deep breath and stepped inside. The receptionist barely glanced at her. "Do you have an appointment?" "I need to speak to Ethan Sinclair." The woman didn't even blink. "He doesn't take walk-ins." Isabella exhaled slowly. "Tell him it's Isabella Reyes. It's important." The receptionist hesitated, then picked up the phone. After a brief conversation, she looked back at Isabella, her expression unchanged. "Mr. Sinclair's assistant says he's unavailable. You can leave a message." Her stomach twisted. She had expected this, but she still wasn't ready for how much it would hurt. "I'll wait," she said stubbornly, lifting her chin. The receptionist pursed her lips. "Miss Reyes, I'm afraid that won't be necessary." Before Isabella could argue, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Miss Reyes." She turned to see a tall woman in a sleek, tailored suit approaching. She recognized her instantly. Ethan's assistant, a woman named Melanie, who had always looked at Isabella as though she were gum stuck to her designer heels. "I'm going to save you some time," Melanie said crisply, looking her up and down. "Mr. Sinclair has no interest in reconnecting with former staff." Isabella's stomach clenched. "He doesn't even know I'm here, and he doesn't need to." Melanie's voice was ice. "I know your type, Miss Reyes. You think just because you spent one night in his bed, you suddenly have some claim on him?" Isabella took a step back, stunned. "That's not—" Melanie didn't let her finish. "Mr. Sinclair is a busy man. He's moved on. I suggest you do the same." "Moved on." Isabella swallowed hard. "Now if you'll excuse me," Melanie said, already turning away. And just like that it was over. She hadn't even gotten the chance to tell him. She stood there for a moment, numb. Then, with quiet dignity, she turned and walked away. She never tried again. The months that followed were the hardest of her life. Morning sickness hit her like a storm, relentless and unforgiving. She worked through it, wiping tables at a diner, her belly growing with each passing week. She had no one, no family, no safety net, nothing to fall back on. But she refused to break. She rented a tiny apartment, barely bigger than a closet. She worked 3 jobs. She saved every penny. And when the time came, she gave birth alone. Leo, Noah, Sophie, her miracles, her reasons for breathing. The first time she held them, she whispered a promise against their tiny warm heads. "I will never let you feel unwanted. I will never let anyone hurt you the way he hurt me." She meant it. She would never let Ethan Sinclair anywhere near them. "Let me hold her, Bella." Julian's voice broke through her exhausted haze. She looked up to see her childhood best friend, Julian, grinning down at her. He had flown in the moment he heard she was in labor, barging into the hospital room with coffee and a wide, lopsided smile. "I don't think you're qualified," she mumbled, sleep-deprived but grateful. "Are you kidding? I've held exactly one baby before, and he only cried for like 10 minutes. She chuckled despite herself and carefully handed Sophie to him. Look at this little peanut, Julian cooed, swaying slightly as Sophie wriggled in his arms. I'm her favorite uncle already, I can tell. You're her only uncle, Isabella pointed out. Exactly, which means I win by default, she smiled, exhaustion pulling at her bones. Julian had been the only steady thing in her life since she had left Ethan's world behind. He never judged, never questioned. He was just there, and when she had cried at night, overwhelmed and terrified, he had been the one to remind her, You've got this, Bella. You're the strongest person I know. The years passed. Leo, Noah, and Sophie grew up without knowing who their father was, and Isabella made sure they never felt his absence. She worked tirelessly, making sure they had everything they needed. She built a small but beautiful life for them. They laughed, they loved, they thrived, and she convinced herself she would never have to see Ethan Sinclair again. Until one night, fate had other plans. The restaurant buzzed with the low hum of polite conversation. Ethan Sinclair sat at the head of a long table, surrounded by business partners and industry elites. He swirled the whiskey in his glass, barely listening to the discussion around him. Deals were being made, numbers thrown back and forth, but he found himself bored. This was his world, the world he had built after clawing his way to the top. So why did it feel so empty? Ladies and gentlemen, one of the investors said with a booming voice, raising his glass, a toast to Ethan Sinclair, the man who turns everything he touches into gold. Laughter erupted around the table, but Ethan barely mustered a smirk. He lifted his glass out of politeness, took a sip, and glanced around the restaurant. And then he froze. For a second, he thought he had imagined her. But there she was, Isabella Reyes. She sat at a table by the window, bathed in the golden glow of the city lights outside. She was different, not the quiet, shy maid he had once known. Her dark hair cascaded over one shoulder, framing a face that had lost all traces of the uncertainty and meekness she once carried. Her dress was elegant, simple, but it was the way she carried herself that stunned him. Confident, poised, completely unaffected by the world around her, completely unaffected by him. Ethan couldn't breathe. How was she here? What had she been doing all these years? And then, his gaze shifted. 3 children sat at her table. A boy and a girl were giggling over their plates, while another boy sat more reserved, listening intently as Isabella spoke to them. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. Something about them. He looked closer. The little girl tilted her head, the same way he did when he was deep in thought. One of the boys ruffled his own hair in frustration, the same way Ethan always did when he was impatient. And the quiet one, the one who listened carefully, eyes sharp, calculating. He had Ethan's exact stare. No, it wasn't possible. His grip on his whiskey glass tightened, knuckles going white, because there was no mistaking it. They weren't just any children. They were his. Ethan felt the blood rush in his ears, drowning out the noise of the restaurant. Years had passed, and all this time he had been living his life, unaware that somewhere out there, his children existed. His body moved before his mind caught up, chair scraping against the floor as he abruptly stood. Mr. Sinclair? One of his business partners asked, startled. Ethan didn't answer. He was already walking, straight toward Isabella's table. The moment Ethan reached the table, Isabella looked up. Her expression didn't change. Not surprise, not guilt, not even anger, just quiet, unreadable calm. Ethan's heart pounded as his eyes flickered between her and the 3 children sitting beside her. They were his. He knew they were his. The resemblance was undeniable. The little girl, Sophie, had Isabella's soft features, but his piercing blue eyes. The boys, Leo and Noah, were nearly identical to him at that age, from the sharp jawlines to the way Leo absent-mindedly drummed his fingers against the table, Ethan's own habit. His throat felt tight. He struggled to find words, but Isabella beat him to it. Are you going to stand there all night, Ethan? She asked, picking up her glass of water. Or are you going to say something? Ethan's jaw tightened. His voice came out rough. They're mine. Isabella took a slow sip before setting the glass down, folding her hands together as she met his gaze. Yes, she said simply. Ethan felt like the floor had been ripped from beneath him. He had children, 3 of them, and he hadn't even known. How the hell had this happened? Why hadn't she told him? Why? Before he could ask, a small voice interrupted. Dad? Ethan's chest clenched at the word, until he realized the boy wasn't looking at him. Leo had turned to Julian, who sat beside Isabella with an ease that made Ethan's blood run cold. A sharp, unfamiliar rage coursed through him. He barely managed to keep his voice steady. What the hell is going on? Julian sighed, looking between Ethan and Isabella, as if this was the moment he had been dreading. Leo, Isabella's voice was gentle. Why don't you and your siblings go pick out dessert? Leo hesitated, eyes flickering back to Ethan. Something in Ethan softened. The kid was watching him, studying him, like he knew something wasn't right. But Leo didn't argue. He took Sophie and Noah's hands and led them toward the dessert display. Ethan watched them go, his pulse hammering in his ears. The moment they were out of earshot, he turned back to Isabella, voice low and seething. They think he's their father? Julian exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't think this is the time. Shut up, Ethan snapped, glaring at him before turning his burning gaze to Isabella. You let them call him that? Isabella's expression didn't waver. They needed a father, she said evenly. Julian was there. You weren't. Ethan felt like he had been punched in the gut. She said it so easily, so matter-of-factly, as if it had been the only possible outcome. He ran a hand through his hair, taking a step closer. You should have told me. I tried, Isabella countered, her voice sharp now. I called. I wrote. But your assistant made it very clear you didn't want to be disturbed by a former maid. Ethan's breath hitched. She wasn't lying. He remembered that time. I didn't know, he muttered, shaking his head. Would it have mattered? That was the real question, wasn't it? If she had told him back then, before the kids, before Julian, before this, would he have stayed? Isabella was watching him, reading the hesitation in his silence. She gave a small, humorless laugh. That's what I thought. Something twisted in his chest. I want to be in their lives, he said firmly. Isabella's jaw tightened. No, Ethan stiffened. Excuse me? You don't get to decide that, she said, her voice softer but no less sharp. You left before, Ethan. You disappeared without a second thought. I won't let you hurt them too. Hurt them. She thought he would hurt them. Ethan clenched his fists, something desperate clawing at his insides. I didn't know about them, he ground out. But you would have left anyway, wouldn't you? Isabella whispered. Ethan didn't answer, because he wasn't sure what the truth was. Mr. Sinclair. Ethan turned, face hardening instinctively at the interruption. One of his business associates, Martin Blake, approached him, an apologetic but expectant look on his face. I hate to intrude, but the investors are waiting for you. Ethan barely heard him. His mind was still on Isabella, on the 3 children inside that restaurant. His children. He turned back, but Isabella was already leaving, her figure disappearing into the night. Ethan left that restaurant with a feeling he couldn't quite put into words, a heaviness he'd never felt before. That night, sleep refused to come, replaced instead by images of 3 small faces that were somehow reflections of his own. He paced his room, restless, agitated, lost in a maze of questions he couldn't escape. Early the next morning, determination burned away his confusion. He couldn't let this go. He wouldn't. Not this time. He had already missed so much. No matter what Isabella thought of him, he needed to try, and he needed to start now. He went to Isabella's neighborhood, a cozy, middle-class area far from his penthouse. It felt warm here, alive with families, bicycles left in driveways, children's laughter echoing from backyards. So different from the cold, empty grandeur he was used to. When Isabella answered the door, surprise flickered across her face, quickly replaced by guarded suspicion. Ethan? She asked warily. What are you doing here? He steadied his nerves. I want to talk, please. She hesitated, eyes searching his face for something. Sincerity, perhaps? After a moment, she nodded quietly and stepped aside. Inside the house, sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating walls covered in children's artwork, bright, colorful pictures, happy memories he'd had no part in creating. His chest tightened. He heard small footsteps before he saw them. Leo, Noah, and Sophie stopped abruptly in the hallway, peering curiously at him from a safe distance. Isabella gently motioned them forward. Kids, she began softly, her voice shaking slightly. You remember Mr. Sinclair from yesterday? Leo's eyes darkened. Ethan could feel the boy's distrust radiating like heat. Noah stayed still, quiet and cautious, watching closely. Sophie, however, smiled shyly, her blue eyes wide with curiosity. Ethan's heart lurched. Hi, Ethan offered quietly, forcing a gentle smile. He'd never felt more unsure, more vulnerable. It's nice to officially meet you. Are you really our dad? Sophie asked, stepping closer, her tone innocent and unguarded. Leo's expression hardened, protective. He stepped in front of his sister. We already have a dad, he said sharply, his gaze challenging Ethan. Julian is our dad. Ethan felt the sting of that statement deeply, but he took a careful breath, reminding himself he had no right to be angry. He lowered himself to their eye level, keeping his voice gentle. I understand, he said slowly, meeting Leo's fierce gaze. Julian has been here for you. I'm grateful he's been in your lives. Leo seemed surprised at this admission. He folded his arms, suspicious but silent. Noah finally spoke, his voice hesitant and careful. Why weren't you here? Ethan swallowed hard, the question hitting him like a blow. He considered lying, maybe something softer, easier. But the truth was what they needed. Because I made a huge mistake, he admitted quietly. I didn't know you existed, and I didn't try hard enough to find out. That's my fault, Noah. I'm sorry. The boy seemed to weigh his words carefully, then gave the tiniest nod, curiosity replacing hesitation in his eyes. The moment felt fragile, like glass on the verge of shattering. Isabella's quiet voice broke the tense silence. Kids, go play outside. I need to talk to Mr. Sinclair. Once they ran outside, Isabella faced Ethan, eyes blazing fiercely. Do you understand what you're doing? Her voice was a mixture of desperation and anger. You can't just show up and then vanish again whenever your fancy strikes. They're children. They deserve better. I know, Ethan said softly, voice thick with emotion. I've missed 5 years. I can't ever make up for that. But I'm here now, Isabella, and I'm staying. She searched his eyes, conflicted, as though deciding whether or not to believe him. Why now, Ethan? You had a life without us. You didn't need us before. Because now I know exactly what I lost, he replied simply, and nothing in my old life matters compared to them, to you all. Isabella drew in a shaky breath, glancing away. This isn't going to be easy. Leo's angry, and he has every right to be. Noah might seem quiet, but he's observant. He needs consistency. Sophie, she's sweet, but she'll expect you to keep every promise. I understand, Ethan assured her. Whatever you ask of me, I'll do. Whatever they need, I'll be. Isabella studied him for a long, quiet moment, considering his words carefully. Then prove it, she said finally, her voice soft but unyielding. Not just today, not just tomorrow, every day. Even when it's not convenient or easy. Even when you have other priorities. Ethan nodded firmly, determination burning in his eyes. I will. She let out a slow breath, tension slowly easing from her posture. We'll see. He left their house that day with newfound clarity. His journey wouldn't be easy. Trust had to be rebuilt, mistakes forgiven, but he was ready. Over the following weeks, he became a steady presence. He attended soccer practices, art classes, and school meetings. When Noah struggled with a school project, Ethan stayed up late helping him. When Sophie had nightmares, he reassured her over the phone. When Leo snapped at him in anger, Ethan absorbed every harsh word, patiently proving that he was there to stay. Slowly, carefully, he began weaving himself into their lives. Noah's quiet caution gradually gave way to genuine curiosity, asking questions about Ethan's work, his favorite food, and even small things like his favorite color. Sophie blossomed openly, excitedly sharing her drawings and hugging him tightly each time they met. Leo remained guarded, testing Ethan at every opportunity, but Ethan never backed away. He was determined to show the boy he wasn't there to replace Julian, but simply to be someone else Leo could rely upon. It wasn't easy, but Ethan found he cherished even the smallest victories. The first time Leo willingly spoke to him, the subtle nod of approval Leo gave when Ethan cheered for him at a soccer game. Isabella watched him closely, maintaining boundaries, wary yet quietly hopeful. She saw Ethan's dedication, the canceled meetings, the ignored calls from powerful associates, the way he always prioritized the kids first. Each time she warned him, he reaffirmed his determination, his sincerity unwavering. You're not making this easy for me, Ethan, Isabella admitted softly one evening, watching him tuck Sophie into bed. You're making me want to believe you. Ethan looked up at her, determination and quiet strength filling his expression. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. I want you to believe me, Isabella, because I'm not going anywhere. For the first time since he had walked back into her life, Isabella allowed herself a small, genuine smile. I almost believe you, she said softly. Don't make me regret it. I won't, Ethan promised firmly, feeling hopeful for the first time. A week later, Ethan made another life-altering decision. He moved out of his sleek penthouse overlooking the city and bought a house just a few streets away from Isabella and the kids. It wasn't the sprawling estate he was used to. No butlers, no chandeliers, no high-tech security systems, but it was warm, filled with sunlight, with a big backyard perfect for the kids. He knew Isabella was still hesitant about letting him in fully, but when she saw the house, something flickered in her eyes. You did this for them, she asked quietly. For them, Ethan confirmed, and for me, I want to be close. I want to be here. She didn't say anything, and she didn't protest. Not everyone was happy with Ethan's transformation. His mother, Barbara Sinclair, had built an empire alongside her late husband. She valued power above all else. To her, Ethan's choices weren't just foolish. They were an insult to everything the Sinclair name stood for. So when she showed up at Isabella's doorstep, unannounced, wearing an elegant pearl-white suit, Isabella immediately knew this wasn't a social visit. Barbara stepped inside without being invited, her sharp eyes scanning the modest home. I expected something smaller, she remarked coldly. Isabella crossed her arms, refusing to be intimidated. Why are you here, Mrs. Sinclair? Barbara's expression barely shifted as she pulled out a sleek checkbook from her purse. To offer you an opportunity. She sat down gracefully at the dining table and clicked her pen open. You've done well for yourself, Isabella, Barbara continued, her voice smooth as silk. Raising 3 children alone, without support. Admirable, really. But let's not pretend this is the life you want for them. The Sinclair family has resources beyond your imagination. Private education, security, a future where they never have to struggle. Be reasonable. Let Ethan return to his world. Take this. She slid the checkbook across the table. The amount written was enough to change anyone's life. Isabella didn't even glance at it. Her fingers curled into fists as she stared at the woman who had once dismissed her as nothing. Are you trying to buy my children? Isabella's voice was calm, but her eyes burned with anger. Barbara sighed, looking at her with a mix of pity and disdain. I'm giving you a chance to walk away with dignity. Name your price. Isabella picked up the checkbook, tore it in half, and let the pieces fall onto the table. Get out, she said, voice shaking, but not with fear, with rage. I don't need your money, and my children are not for sale. Barbara's nostrils flared slightly. She stood, smoothing out her blazer, before delivering her final warning. This is not over. When Ethan found out, he stormed into his mother's estate, barely keeping his fury in check. How dare you, he seethed, slamming his hands onto her pristine marble desk. How dare you try to buy Isabella off? Barbara remained poised, sipping her tea as if she were entirely unbothered. She's an inconvenience. You're making a mistake, Ethan. The only mistake I made was letting you control me for so long, he shot back. You don't get to decide what's best for my kids. I do. His mother's eyes narrowed. The Sinclair name comes with responsibility. You think you can just walk away from that? I already have. Barbara set her teacup down carefully, the sound echoing in the vast room. Then you leave me no choice. Ethan frowned. What the hell does that mean? She met his gaze, expression unreadable. I'll take legal action. His blood ran cold. I can argue for custody, claim the children deserve the stability and wealth only the Sinclair family can provide. She tilted her head, her voice deceptively soft. Do you really think the courts would side with a single mother over the Sinclairs? Rage twisted inside Ethan. He leaned in, his voice low, dangerous. You will not take my children from their mother. Barbara simply smiled. Then walk away, Ethan. It's the only way this ends without a fight. He stepped back, shaking his head in disbelief. You know what's pathetic? You're so obsessed with power that you don't even care about the kids. You just want to win. Barbara didn't deny it. With one last look at the woman who had shaped him into the ruthless businessman he had once been, Ethan exhaled deeply and made his choice. I'm leaving. Barbara's eyes narrowed. Leaving what exactly? This. He gestured around her grand estate, the place that had once defined him, controlled him, the board, the family name, everything you've been trying to use to keep me in line. Barbara's face twisted in anger. You're walking away from everything your father and I built. For what? Some maid and a few children you didn't even know existed until a few months ago? You don't get it, he said, calmer now, and I don't expect you to. But for the first time, I know what I want, and it's not this. Ethan turned, walking away, not in anger, not in rebellion, but in certainty. He wasn't running, he was choosing. The school fair was alive with the laughter of children, the scent of cotton candy drifting through the air. The triplets had been looking forward to this for weeks, and Isabella had promised them a fun-filled day. Leo, Noah, and Sophie ran ahead, eager to explore. Ethan had been invited, though Isabella was still wary of how involved she wanted him to be. But seeing the way the kids lit up around him made it harder and harder to keep him at a distance. All right, stay where I can see you, Isabella called after them, scanning the crowd to make sure they didn't stray too far. For the first hour, everything was perfect. Sophie dragged Ethan to the arts and crafts table, proudly making him wear the flower crown she had created. Noah, hesitant at first, let Ethan help him win a stuffed animal at the ring toss. Even Leo, who had been the most guarded, laughed as Ethan lifted him onto his shoulders to get a better view of the magician on stage. But in the blink of an eye, everything changed. Isabella turned for just a second to grab napkins for the cotton candy Sophie had smeared all over her face when she heard Noah's panicked voice. Mom, Leo's gone! The world seemed to tilt. Isabella's breath caught as she spun around, scanning the crowd. What do you mean he's gone? He was just here. Sophie's voice trembled. He said he was going to look at the balloons, but now I don't see him. A cold wave of fear crashed into Isabella. Leo, her most stubborn, adventurous child, her little troublemaker with a fierce independence, but he was still just a boy. Her heart pounded. Leo! She shouted, pushing through the crowd, her panic rising with every second that passed. People were everywhere. Parents, teachers, and students. The noise was overwhelming. She turned in circles, her vision blurring. Ethan was already moving, his sharp eyes scanning the area, his expression deadly serious. "You go that way," he told Isabella, pointing toward the playground. "I'll check the other side." Isabella didn't argue. She ran. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears as she searched, calling his name, her throat tightening with fear. It had only been a few minutes, but every second felt like an eternity. And then her phone rang. She fumbled to answer, her hands shaking. "I have him," Ethan's voice came through, steady but urgent. "Behind the school, near the parking lot. He's okay." She barely heard the rest. She was already running. When she found them, her heart nearly broke. Leo was clutching Ethan's jacket, his small fingers tangled in the fabric as he sobbed into his father's chest. Ethan was kneeling, one arm wrapped protectively around his son, whispering something to him, something meant to soothe. The moment Leo spotted Isabella, he ran to her, burying his face against her stomach. "Mommy," he hiccuped. I didn't mean to get lost." She dropped to her knees, holding him close, kissing the top of his head. "I was so scared," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Don't ever run off like that again." Leo nodded against her, sniffling. But then, something happened that made Isabella freeze. Leo turned back to Ethan, stepping toward him uncertainly. His small fingers reached out, wrapping around Ethan's hand. He hesitated for just a second before whispering, "Daddy." Ethan's breath hitched. It was the first time any of them had said it. For weeks, Ethan had fought for their love, their trust, but Leo had been the most guarded, the most resentful. And now, standing there in the afternoon light, his little face still streaked with tears, Leo had chosen to call him Daddy. Ethan's throat worked, his grip tightening around Leo's hand. "Yeah, buddy," he said, voice thick. "I'm here." From a few steps away, Isabella watched as her son, the one who had always been the hardest to reach, reached for Ethan like he had always been there. And that's when she realized something terrifying. Her children trusted Ethan now. They needed him. Isabella wasn't sure if she was still protecting them by keeping Ethan at a distance, or if she was just protecting herself. The air between them was heavy with unspoken emotions. As Isabella stood at the doorway, arms crossed, Ethan had done everything right. He had been there, fought for their children, proved himself time and time again. But still, a quiet fear gripped her heart. "What do you want, Ethan? Is this just another phase? Another decision you'll undo when things get hard?" Ethan's brows furrowed. "You really think I'd walk away now?" "I don't want to think that," she admitted, "but I have to be sure." Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "What are you asking me to do?" She hesitated, then met his eyes. "Stay. Be here. For them." "For how long?" "As long as it takes." Silence stretched between them, thick with tension. "Or," Isabella continued, her throat tightening, "if you're not completely sure, if there's even one part of you that thinks you might regret this, then leave now. I won't stop you." Ethan flinched at her words, like she had physically struck him, but then he nodded. Not in agreement, not in surrender, but in understanding. "I'm not leaving." His voice was steady. "Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." Isabella swallowed hard, wanting to believe him. He took a step forward, softer now. "I know I hurt you. I know I wasn't there when you needed me, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Still, she hesitated. "Ethan, I'll prove it," he said, voice unwavering. "Every single day, not just for a year, forever." And so he stayed, through school drop-offs, through late-night fevers, through scraped knees and bedtime stories. He stayed when Leo tested his patience, when Noah still hesitated, when Sophie curled into his arms like she had always belonged there. And little by little, Isabella saw the truth. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't temporary. Ethan Sinclair wasn't going anywhere. The warmth that had started to settle in Isabella's heart was ripped away in an instant. She stood frozen in the doorway, her hands clenched tightly around the crisp flight ticket she had found on the counter. Ethan's name, a departure date, a first-class seat, one way. Her stomach twisted painfully. She had known this was too good to be true. Just as she had started to believe, to hope, to let herself think, this happened. A small voice pulled her out of her thoughts. "Mommy?" She turned to see Sophie standing in the hallway, her big brown eyes filled with uncertainty. "Leo said Daddy's leaving," Sophie whispered, gripping the hem of her dress. "Is he?" Isabella's heart cracked. She forced a smile, tight, controlled, unreadable. "Go play with your brothers, sweetheart." Sophie hesitated, but then nodded and ran off. Isabella took a shaky breath, pushing down the sting of betrayal. Then, with fire burning behind her ribs, she stormed out of the house. Ethan was in the backyard, helping Noah with his soccer kicks when he heard her voice. "Ethan." He turned, his smile fading the moment he saw her face. She looked livid. No, worse. She looked disappointed. "What's wrong?" he asked cautiously. Isabella didn't answer right away. She took a deep breath, lifted her hand, and threw the flight ticket at him. It fluttered through the air before landing at his feet. Ethan frowned, picking it up. The moment he saw what it was, his stomach dropped. "Explain," Isabella demanded, arms crossed, voice cold. Ethan opened his mouth, then shut it. He knew how bad this looked. Don't," she cut him off. "Don't lie to me." "I wasn't going to lie," he said quickly. "Just give me a second to explain." "A second?" Isabella let out a hollow laugh. "That's funny, because I bet that's all it took for you to decide to leave again." "I'm not leaving," Ethan snapped, frustration rising. "Oh? Then what's this?" She pointed at the ticket like it was a smoking gun. Ethan inhaled sharply, pinching the bridge of his nose. "It's my mother." Isabella froze. "What?" "She bought the ticket," he admitted, jaw tight. "She's been pressuring me to leave, said I was ruining my future, that I didn't belong here, that I should go back to—" "I knew it," Isabella whispered. She stepped back, shaking her head. "I knew this was temporary." Ethan's chest ached. "Isabella, listen to me." "No," her voice trembled. "I should have never let you in again. I should have never let the kids get attached." Ethan's heart dropped. "Isabella, just go." The words sliced through him like a blade. His breath caught. "I don't go." Her voice was firm, final, filled with an unbearable pain that made his throat tighten. And just like that, she turned her back on him. She walked away, just like he once had. Only this time, it wasn't him who had left. The rain came down in sheets, cold and relentless, soaking through Ethan's clothes as he stood outside Isabella's house. He had been there for hours. He should have left. He should have gone home, dried off, and accepted that she didn't want him here. But he couldn't. His whole life, he had walked away when things got too hard, too complicated, too painful. But this wasn't something he could walk away from. So he stayed. He stayed as the rain ran down his face, dripping from his lashes. He stayed as the cold seeped into his bones, numbing his fingers, his body, everything except the ache in his chest. And then at last, the door creaked open. Ethan barely turned his head, his body stiff from standing in place too long. Isabella stood in the doorway, wrapped in a thick sweater, her hair damp from the humidity. She looked at him, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You're still here," she whispered. Her voice wasn't cold this time. It wasn't sharp or accusing. It was soft, uncertain. Ethan exhaled shakily, forcing a tired smile. "Told you I wasn't leaving." Isabella didn't move. She just stared at him, like she didn't quite believe what she was seeing. "You're insane," she muttered, stepping onto the porch. "Probably," Ethan admitted, "but I'm not leaving, Isabella." Something in her cracked. Her arms loosened from around her body. Her shoulders dropped, and then, to his utter shock, her eyes filled with tears. She clenched her jaw, tilting her head back, as if trying to blink them away. But it was too late. They fell. "You stayed," she whispered, her voice breaking. Ethan felt his breath hitch. The pain in those words. He had no idea how much she had needed him to stay back then, how much she had hoped, only to be let down. She let out a shaky breath, then stepped forward. And before Ethan could process what was happening, she was pressing her forehead against his chest, her hands gripping his soaked shirt, her entire body trembling. Ethan froze. Then slowly, carefully, he wrapped his arms around her. She didn't pull away. And in that moment, standing there in the rain, Isabella finally let go of the past, and Ethan, he held on to his future. The school auditorium buzzed with the excited chatter of parents, teachers, and students. The walls decorated with colorful banners reading "Happy Father's Day" in playful, uneven lettering. Ethan sat stiffly in the audience, his hands gripping his knees, heart hammering against his ribs. He didn't know why he was so nervous. Maybe because this was the first time he was truly being acknowledged, not as Ethan Sinclair, billionaire businessman, but as Ethan Sinclair, father. Beside him, Isabella sat with her arms crossed, pretending to be unaffected by his presence. But he saw the way her fingers drummed lightly against her arm, the way her lips pressed together in quiet anticipation. She was nervous too. The stage lights dimmed slightly, and the teacher took the microphone. "Good afternoon, everyone," she said with a warm smile. "Welcome to our annual Father's Day celebration. Today, the children have prepared something very special to show their appreciation for the wonderful father figures in their lives." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Ethan swallowed hard as he scanned the little faces on stage, his chest tightening when he spotted them. Leo, standing tall with his arms crossed, so much like Ethan himself. His sharp eyes scanned the crowd, as if daring anyone to say something embarrassing. Noah, quieter but more focused, rocked back and forth on his heels, his hands clasped behind his back. And Sophie, sweet, bright-eyed Sophie, stood in the middle, gripping a small piece of paper, her lips pursed in concentration. Ethan's heart ached at the sight of them, his children, his entire world. Now, the teacher continued, each student has chosen someone special to honor today. They've written a few words about the person who means the most to them. One by one, the kids began stepping forward, reading their messages. Fathers and grandfathers in the audience beamed with pride as their names were called, some wiping away a tear or two. Ethan's hands clenched into fists as the line grew shorter. Then finally, Sophie took a deep breath and stepped toward the microphone. Ethan stopped breathing. "My name is Sophie Reyes," she said, her voice a little wobbly but steady with determination. "And I want to talk about someone who wasn't always in my life, but who never gave up on being there for me." A murmur rippled through the audience. Isabella stiffened beside him. Ethan couldn't move. Sophie glanced down at her paper, then back up. Her small hands trembled slightly, but she continued. "This person didn't get to see my first steps or hear my first words," she said softly. "He wasn't there when I lost my first tooth or when I learned how to ride a bike, but he's here now, and he tries every day to show me and my brothers how much he loves us." The air in the room felt charged, heavy. Sophie turned toward the audience, and for the first time she met Ethan's eyes. "My dad," she said clearly, "is Ethan Sinclair." A hush fell over the auditorium. Ethan's entire world stopped. The words echoed in his head. "My dad is Ethan Sinclair." His throat tightened, his vision blurred. He couldn't blink, couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then suddenly, Noah and Leo stepped forward, standing beside their sister. Leo, who had been the most resistant, lifted his chin, his expression unreadable. But then, he nodded. "And Noah?" He hesitated only a second before reaching for the microphone. "Yeah," he added softly. "He's our dad." Ethan's chest ached. A raw, powerful emotion surged through him, threatening to break him apart. He felt Isabella shift beside him, but he couldn't look at her. He couldn't look at anyone but them, his kids, claiming him, accepting him, loving him. A sharp sting burned his eyes, and he let out a shaky breath. Then, before he could stop himself, he stood up. The movement caught the triplets' attention. Sophie beamed, Noah grinned, and even Leo, tough, guarded Leo, let out a small, relieved exhale. Ethan didn't care about the murmurs around him, didn't care about the looks people were giving him. He just pressed a hand over his heart, nodding at his children, silent, unbreakable, and completely theirs. From the corner of his eye, he saw Isabella wipe away a tear, but for once, she didn't try to hide it. A few months later, summer vacations, they planned a trip to a beach. Children ran along the shoreline, their laughter mixing with the gentle rhythm of the ocean. Ethan stood at the edge of the water, his toes sinking into the cool sand. A few feet ahead, Leo, Noah, and Sophie chased the tide, squealing as the waves lapped at their ankles. Their joy was infectious, so pure, so real. He still couldn't believe this was his life now. For so long, his world had been measured in numbers, profit margins, stock prices, negotiations in boardrooms filled with men in stiff suits. But now, his world was measured in the sound of Sophie's giggles, the way Noah's eyes lit up when he learned something new, and the rare but treasured moments when Leo let his guard down and actually smiled. "Dad, look!" Ethan turned just in time to see Noah hurl a small, smooth rock into the water, watching it skip twice before sinking. "Did you see that?" Noah's eyes sparkled with pride. "That was 3 skips, almost 4. Ethan smirked, crossing his arms. "You call that skipping? Watch this." He picked up a rock, feeling the weight of it in his palm, before flicking his wrist. The stone bounced across the water once, twice, 3, 4, then vanished beneath the surface. Noah's mouth fell open. "No way. Beginner's luck," Leo muttered. But Ethan caught the slight twitch of a smile. Sophie ran up to them, holding a seashell up to the sky. "Daddy, do you think mermaids live in here?" Ethan crouched down, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Maybe," he said, lowering his voice to a playful whisper. "But if they do, you have to keep their secret." Sophie gasped dramatically, nodding with wide eyes. "I won't tell anyone." Ethan chuckled, pulling her in for a hug. He still wasn't used to the word, daddy, but every time they said it, something inside him softened, something he didn't even know had been frozen for years. A soft voice behind him made his breath hitch. "They adore you, you know." He turned to see Isabella standing a few steps away, her sundress swaying gently in the breeze. She looked more at peace than he had ever seen her, the hard edges of the woman who had once shut him out, now softened by quiet acceptance. He swallowed, standing up. "I adore them too." She nodded, crossing her arms as she watched the kids run along the shore. A comfortable silence stretched between them, before Ethan finally spoke. "I've been thinking about something." Isabella arched a brow, waiting. He exhaled. "The kids, they've always had your last name." His voice was careful, measured, "and I respect that. But if they want to, I'd love for them to have mine too." He hesitated, studying her face. He wasn't demanding it. He wasn't trying to claim them. He just wanted to share them, to be a part of them in every way possible. Isabella looked at him for a long moment, before her gaze flickered toward the children. "You should ask them," she finally said. Ethan turned to the triplets, who had stopped playing and were now watching their parents curiously. Taking a deep breath, he knelt in the sand, leveling his gaze with theirs. "I want to ask you guys something," he said gently. "It's completely your choice, and you don't have to decide right now. But, would you want to have my last name too?" Noah tilted his head. "So we'd be Reyes Sinclair?" Ethan nodded. "If that's what you want." Leo was quiet, his brows furrowed. "What if we say no?" Ethan smiled softly. "Then nothing changes. You'll still be my kids, and I'll still love you the same." Leo looked at Noah, then at Sophie. Then, without a word, Sophie ran up to Ethan and threw her arms around his neck. "I want to be Sophie Reyes Sinclair." Noah grinned. "Me too." Leo hesitated, staring at Ethan with a look that was unreadable, but then slowly, he extended a hand. "Okay," he mumbled. Ethan grasped Leo's hand, shaking it firmly before pulling him into a hug. For a moment, he held all three of them, their small arms wrapped around him tightly, as if they finally belonged to him, and he to them. When he looked up, Isabella was smiling. Not just a polite smile, not just a reserved, cautious expression, a real smile. One that told him, without words, that she no longer saw him as the man who had walked away, but as the man who had stayed, as the man who chose them, as their family. And for Ethan Sinclair,